Hello and welcome to Moneylife News and Views. I am Debashis Basu. We are all discussing China these days. For the first time in 45 years, India has lost soldiers, that to as many as 20 to Chinese attacks. Apparently some Indian soldiers were beaten to death with sticks, stones, rocks and nail-studded clubs. And some were pushed down the steep slope of the Galwan river and the others died of hypothermia in the cold desert of Ladakh. This is a strange way two nuclear powers have fought, but the end result is that there is an upsurge of anger within the country. Our immediate reaction is to boycott Chinese goods, or at least talk about it, burn the effigy of the Chinese president and unleash a xenophobic fury everywhere, from television channels to social media to WhatsApp groups. This, according to me, is laughable. Our anger is actually directed at the wrong enemy. By blaming China, we give a free pass to our own political leaders who have kept us poor, weak and stupid. And there are three reasons I'm afraid this is not going to change. Point number one is that we seem to be clueless about China's actual tactics. Anti-China people, the hawks in the West, argue that China has a 100-year strategy to subjugate the world. They see themselves as a far superior people who lost their last few hundred years, and they're going to come back now. And it has no respect for Western democracy and no respect for civil liberties, the kind that we cherish. It has imperial ambitions and is engaged in a continuous information, economic and technological warfare to weaken the West. They also say that China has a Made in China 2025 policy, as part of which they not just develop their own technology, but they are not afraid or not embarrassed to steal and buy Western intellectual capital. This will, they say, give them a big lead in biotechnology, advanced chip design, artificial intelligence, robotics and quantum computing. Whether all this is true or not, or whether this is all just a conspiracy theory, it is clear that Indian diplomats and our political leaders have proven to be absolute babes in the woods in dealing with China. For instance, India has shrugged off US warnings about Chinese tech company Huawei and allowed it to participate in 5G trials. Under PM Modi, Indian authorities had set a laughably ambitious target of 14 million Chinese tourists by 2023, that's just 3 years from now, up from just 240,000 in 2017. The two countries have planned a series of celebrations to mark the 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties this year. The boat rides in Sabarmati, sitting on a swing in the Gandhi ashram, the hugs and bonding between Modi and Xi in dozens of meetings around the world now look utterly naive now. India seems clueless about China's vision and tactics. Point number two, we want to cut off our nose to spite our face. India's trade deficit with China was almost $57 billion in 2019, and India has no power to reverse this. Indian consumers have gained enormously due to cheaper imports. Will they be ready to pay for costlier Korean or Japanese products? The cold fact is that India is economically uncompetitive and cannot afford to retaliate economically. For instance, India imports 70% of the bulk drugs from China. Are we going to live without antibiotics if we want to ban Chinese goods? While China accounts for 14% of India's imports, China's imports from India is just 1%. We can cut off our nose to spite our face, of course, but it won't hurt China. This takes us to the heart of the third and the most important point, which is India's economic weakness. Both India and China were poor countries till 1978, after which economic reforms in China have transformed the country and India has continued to bumble along. While we have benefited from lucky breaks from time to time, by and large we are taking 15 to 20 years to get where China and earlier Taiwan or South Korea or Japan and even now Vietnam is reaching in just 5 years. China managed to develop what they call capitalism with Chinese characteristics and make it work. While what we should have done is freed our people from the vast web of state and private extortion and rent seeking that saps our energy every step of the way. Dismantling an extractive state would have unleashed innovation and growth at a stunning pace and scale. Instead, successive governments have introduced more and more rules overseen by a coercive state, not just in the center, but in the states as well. What passes for economic reforms is very mere, weak kind of a tinkering, and which have no effect on economic competitiveness. We want to teach China a lesson. The road to that is economic competitiveness. For this, we should start first by training our guns and raising our voices against the self-serving, incompetent, corrupt netas and babus who have kept India poor and weak, as reflected in our poor education system, creaking healthcare, abysmal productivity, and very, very poor innovation. Dressing up India's economic weakness with chauvinistic narrative and trying to scapegoat Beijing, they are good tactics to hide our failure to make India economically strong. It may temporarily offload public anger, but will weaken us further in the long run. We have a bigger enemy than China or Pakistan, and that enemy is on this side of the border, not the other side. Thanks for watching.